Hi everybody, thank you for tuning in to Train Crash TV. I'll be your host, Richard, as we go into another exciting episode of History Talk. For this episode, we will be covering the railroad in Fallout 4, continuing our series, Fallout versus Real History. Now, railroad is sort of an on-the-nose kind of thing, just like with the Minutemen. But before we go any further, I have one question for you. Would you give your life to protect this other person, even if that person was a synth? For those of you who do not understand, a synth is sort of a machine that is a human. If your answer is yes, then I have one key phrase for you to follow. Follow the Freedom Trail. Watch out for Swan. He does not like trespassers. And if your answer is no, then please do not rat us out to the Institute. Now, onward and upward, as I always say, as we compare the railroad. The railroad, as you could guess it, is sort of a play off of the actual Underground Railroad from the American history during the 1800s, not just during the Civil War. I know that a lot of people get that confused and they assume the railroad only operated before and during the Civil War. But it actually was started by the abolitionist movement, which has existed in the United States since early 1800s, 1830s if I can remember correctly. Again, this is all improbable, all out of my head. And I'm going to tell you where I can see the connections. They're designed to, one comparison is they were both designed to help out runaway synths or slaves. Now, huge warning, right now, quick. This isn't me being funny. This isn't me going to joke around a little bit like I did at the beginning part of the video. This video is going to cover the topic of slavery, hence we are going to be comparing the railroad of our timeline, which helped and aided African slaves out of the agricultural South, and the Fallout 4 timeline, which the railroad helps synthetic peoples out of the Institute. I want to make that distinction very, very clear. I know by just talking about or mentioning slavery in a video that I'm going to get a lot of angry comments. And I just want to make you understand that. Now again, onward and upward. We first get our real experience with the railroad through rumors, which is basically how the actual railroad operated. They were abolitionists who believed that slavery was wrong and was an evil institution, and they were going to do their best to liberate the slaves from the plantations, which more power to them. It was a very dangerous job, and you could be arrested because what they were doing was breaking the law. Now, when we look at Fallout 4's railroad, what they were doing was not necessarily illegal. Well, it was illegal in the eyes of the Institute, but what do you expect in a universe where there's no basic law except the law of survival? They kidnapped synths from a highly technological superior force that were basically used for manual labor and stuff that the scientists of the Institute didn't want to do. And a lot of these Sims, as we see in the game, have become self-aware and became more and more human as they progressed. Ergo, they realized that what the Institute was doing was considered, by most people's standards, slavery, being forced without pay to commit to mindless, tedious tasks, which usually probably ended up with injury or self-harm, being treated as bottom-of-the-barrel citizens, and as, even worse so, not even citizens, treated as property. We see that in the American South during slavery. There is no getting around to that. I know there's going to be somebody. This is going to be the only video where I'm going to try and stop being political, but I want to make that very clear to you, that in both realities, in the Fallout 4 reality and in our own reality, slaves and Sims are treated as property. They were considered property, and in the slavery times of America, they were actually taxable as property. And they didn't even count as part of a human. I'm getting physically ill just talking about this subject. So if I start rambling on, please don't strike my page. And another similarity is in the personality types I see in the characters. A little bit of a spoiler warning. Come on, guys, you've had since 2015 to play this game. Doc Carrington, who gives you a lot of your rescue mission when you do endgame, when you blow up the Institute with the Railroad or with the Minutemen. It works either way. You have to go saving Sims, especially if you hit the evacuation code through Sean's terminal. Again, since 2015 you've had to play this game. And Doc Carrington's the guy who gives you... Now, he reminds me a lot of Lloyd Garrison, the guy who actually founded abolition in Philadelphia in the 1830s or 20s. I can't remember exactly what. Again, improv, right off my head. And not just in the fact that they were both doctors, but in the fact that they really cared about saving African Americans and synthetic peoples, and the fact that they would literally do anything to help these people, and the fact that they're pretty much forgotten in the pages of history. The Dr. Carrington is pretty much ignored by some of the other agents in the Institute. And pretty much the same things goes for Mr. Garrison. He's pretty much forgotten in the pages of abolition because he was overshadowed by even more prominent people. Now, let's take a look at Gloria. This is going to be an interesting video because I'm comparing people in game to people in real life, which is not something you've seen me do in the other two videos. We have Gloria, who I think embodies very well Harriet Tubman, just in the fact that she's a total awesome person who literally is in the field helping Sims and not afraid to get her hands dirty when it comes to fighting off the enemy. Now, Harriet Tubman was and is a very well-known member of the Underground Railroad. A former slave herself. I guess you consider her a runaway slave, because I don't believe she was given her freedom, because she was still helping runaway slaves. And she was called Moses by some of the slaves as a kind of a code name. And she helped them get to safe houses in the north, just like Gloria helps synths get to safe houses all over the Commonwealth. And we're not really sure how Harriet Tubman met her end. Well, we do know how Gloria met her end. She was either killed by the Brotherhood of Steel or killed by the Institute when you attacked them. Or if you sided with either the Institute or the Brotherhood of Steel, she was probably most likely killed by you. Because who is the other kick-butt person in that game? Why, it's you, the protagonist. And finally we come to Desdemona. At first I wanted to compare her to Frederick Douglass because she's pretty much the focal point of the entire movement. She is very well spoken, she cares about synths, but she's not afraid to point out all the injustices facing synths, not only by the Institute, but by other people in the world as well. That's why she tries to convince you to join the railroad over the Minutemen, because she does not trust the Minutemen because they embody what the Commonwealth is, and to her, the Commonwealth has always appeared rotten to synths. Synths are shot on sight. And if they were even out in the open, they'd probably be segregated if they weren't shot. And they're feared. What a lot of that is they were just afraid of synths. They were afraid of being replaced. They were afraid of them glitching out and attacking because of the broken mask incident. If you want to know more about that, you're going to have to look up on Fallout lore, especially in Fallout 4 lore. There are a couple of YouTubers that do that, but I'm not one of them. We're not going to discuss the lore. And that's where her rationale is. But then again, I see even more similarities, because she gives you all your kill missions. Like the L&L gain in post end of the Institute level. And post end main game stuff. Where you have to go around killing members of the L&L gang to keep them from harming synths. Which they have. They have harmed many synths. And you also not only have to kill their leaders, but you have to kill their acolytes, their followers, their whatever you want to call them. And when I saw this, I thought for immediately that she's more like a John Brown character. John Brown, as many of you who probably don't realize or know, or probably do know and just pushed it out of your mind because he's technically a terrorist in many circles. John Brown was an extremist abolitionist who famously quoted that the crimes of this guilty land cannot be purged but with blood. And he was willing to fight for that. And he committed several atrocities against people in Kansas. You can only call them atrocities. There was actually one instance where him, his followers, and his sons hacked to death pro-slavery settlers in Kansas with blunt, sword-like knives. Not Bowie knives. They were something else. I can't remember exactly. And his most famous incident came at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, in 1859. This was right before the American Civil War, and sadly isn't really touched on much in middle school or high school history class, unless you study it yourself or unless you get a professor that actually enjoys talking about history or only enjoys talking about history in events and times of the Civil War leading up to the Civil War and during Reconstruction, which happens after the Civil War, but that's in a whole nother video itself. I could do a whole video on John Brown if I just researched it, but then again, this here is improbable. Again, it's right off the top of my head. This is coming out of my brain because this is my way of practicing when I actually do the research on these videos, and I actually blurt out what I'm saying correctly. And some people have pointed that out. Very rudely to me. But I like criticism, so give it to me. Back to John Brown. He attacked Harper's Ferry and kidnapped a bunch of prominent citizens, including the, I think, second great-grandson of, or grandnephew of George Washington. Yep, old Mr. Rotting Teeth himself. He takes Harper's Ferry, and ironically enough, the first person to die in his quest to liberate the slaves by force was in fact a freed slave who was a baggage handler, whose name escapes me now. I cannot remember it, but I used to remember it. He has a standoff with the Marine Corps and the militia, who are being led by a certain famous and, in my opinion, awesome General Lee, Robert Edward Lee, back when he was a colonel in the Union Army. But I digress, again. And it was on the tip of my tongue. He gets surrounded, basically, and his followers, his fellow conspirators, if you will, held out for several hours until they were finally overrun, and the armory, which they had captured, well, it was actually a firehouse, was overrun by the Marine Corps. John Brown, as well as his surviving sons, were arrested, and months later, John Brown was put on trial and hung for treason. The same thing, really, you can compare to Desdemona. I mean, she's not put on trial and for treason, but she is executed if you side with the Institute or the Brotherhood of Steel for her notion that simps not only need to be protected and kept from harm, but the people who enslave them or oppress them need to die. That's where I get the John Brown thing. Now, I know there's going to be people asking, oh, but what is Pam? And what is Deacon doing? Deacon, I couldn't really compare him to anyone from the abolitionist movement that I could think of right off the top of my head. Again, the default, I sort of thought about Frederick Douglass, but Deacon's more of that mouthy uncle that everyone doesn't like to talk to or get going on some jokes. at the family get-together at Christmas time or Thanksgiving. Pam is... I don't even think Pam's really with the railroad. She's just part of the railroad. She helps with calculating and assessing different areas, pointing out locations that are good for, are good for safe houses. She's sort of like a cybernetic Preston Garvey. If Preston Garvey was technically an assaultron with a brain of a supercomputer. And yeah, this is a really hard one because both groups from our timeline and Fallout 4 timeline we don't really understand that much about. They're very secretive, they work in code, and they have helpers that are not really technically part of the group. Deacon calls them tourists. I cannot pronounce that word. Basically somebody who runs recon for the agency and gives back information, which you see in the first mission with when you raid the old Railroad HQ with Deacon. I'm not going to give you the name of the mission. You're just going to have to figure that out on your own. It's basically the very first mission they give you when you run into Ricky, who has been watching a certain Slocum's Joe that has a hidden government facility underneath it. Wait, there's a coffee shop with a freaking government facility hidden underneath it that was responsible for, like, the entire defense network and had a robot that predicted the Great War that caused the world we trample through as our own, like, sadistic playground? I'm ranting again. I'm ranting again. I promised I wouldn't do that. But yeah, they have tons of people that just help them out and run safe houses, just like with the railroad of our timeline. And again, their slogan is another comparison. Follow the Freedom Trail, which starts at Boston Common and runs all the way through some of the most historical buildings. I was kind of disappointed with Paul Revere's house. It's just a collapsed-in building. I thought they could do a little more of it. I mean, the State House, the old State House, was basically a whole settlement in itself. And the Boston courthouse was a dungeon in itself with mirelurks and different kind of levels to it. And Boston Common had the Swan, which was a super mutant, sort of a super mutant behemoth. He was a small super mutant behemoth, but he was definitely one of the tougher ones if you're not like a very high level. And you get the Power Fist, Swan's Fist, when you take him down. And the similarity is, they had a code called Follow the Drinking Horn, which is sort of the same thing. Just follow the Big Dipper, where there's an old man waiting to take you to freedom. They actually had a book of that I used to read in elementary school, and there was actually an episode of Reading Rainbow about it. If you don't know what Reading Rainbow is, then I am old. And another similarity is, these are people who believe in the liberation of an oppressed, what are considered people. At least to them. To the Institute, the synth is just a mindless machine that is only brought to life because they gave it life, and they gave it its purpose, and it is theirs. It is their property. which is exactly how Father, aka Sean, spoiler alert, describes synths. He will never admit that they are people. He will never admit that they are sentient. He believes that it's just glitches in their mainframe, which is why I almost never side with the Institute. I only sided with the Institute in my most recent playthrough, and believe me, my stomach was sick from it, because I believe that synths are people, because they're showing signs of free will, because they're actively leaving the Institute. I mean, there's one mission where you either have to send 5 escaped synths who are hiding in a basement back to the Institute, or kill the courser you're with so you don't have to send those synths back to the Institute. And they are afraid. They're scared, and they don't want to go back to their lives mopping floors and being treated like lab rats and being basically pushed around by people like Dr. Lawrence, who's just a plain old, excuse my language, dick. And freaking Dr. Justin, I can't remember, but he's the head of the Synth Retention Bureau. And he doesn't seem that he cares that much about synths, and he's got like dozens of coursers at his disposal, which are 3rd generation synths, which are just as close to humans. He sends them on missions where they die. What happens if one of them dies? I mean, you have to kill at least 2 of them in this game, and even more when you do so, when you side against the Institute. I mean, come on. The same thing with slavery in America during the time our version of the railroad was operational. They were people who saw these suffering people who were forced to work so other people can be rich for like no reward whatsoever. They weren't allowed to leave unless they were sold. And it was just disgusting. It's just really, really disgusting. And I hate that I'm being so political here, but this is not a political issue alone. This is a moral issue. Just like Fallout 4 presents you with a moral issue. Do you believe that synths are people, or do you believe that they are equipment that just are glitching out like so many in the Institute believe they are? The Institute believes that because they've created the synths. They created the machine that created the synths, they created their personality, even though their personality is branching out on its own. There's even synths like accessing computer terminals. If you actually listen to some of the background conversations that synths are having with coursers, or scientists are having with synths, they're accessing computer terminals, and they're all but being scolded and questioned about their unauthorized use of Institute equipment. It's just really, really upsetting and sad to me, and it was hard for me to side with the Institute. I only sided with the Institute for this recent playthrough to do research for the next video that I'm doing, because I never really got as far as capturing that one synth at Libertalia and the Battle of Bunker Hill. Which, if you played the game, you know what I'm talking about. You understand. It was very, very hard for me to side with the Institute over any of the other, even the Brotherhood of Steel. Over the Brotherhood of Steel, it was very hard to side with them. But I had to, just so I can do the small amount of research I do putting in these films. You watch my videos, you know how little effort I put into this, you know how little information I do. realistically, the railroad is on the nose not only in name, but in operandi. Just like the Minutemen, who are one of my favorite fractions, and I've mentioned this many times in the last two videos, especially the video I did on the Minutemen. And I'm sorry I'm getting excited about this, because it's just an interesting topic, and it's probably, is unarguably, the most interesting part of that entire game, is whether you think that these people that were not created by a divine entity or by evolution, but by machines and scientists, are people. Their dialogue suggests that they're creating free will. That is the first sign that they're people. And the attitudes that the Institute has towards these synthetic peoples made me so mad. This is very controversial in our world. Slavery is wrong. We all know that. At least most of us know that. Truly, we do understand slavery is wrong. The synths in Fallout 4 are treated almost exactly like the slaves of our own timeline. And next video, I'm just going to say it right now, I'm not going to touch on the slavery aspect of the Institute and how they treat the synths. I'm not going to touch on that because I think I've ranted enough about it for this video. I don't like ranting. I don't like raising my voice. I don't like turning videos into like 10-minute spiel sessions about whether or not you should think that synths have free will, which they obviously do if you actually pay attention to the game and follow the actual playthrough. Trust me. If you play Fallout 4, and if you haven't played but are planning to, just pay attention to the playthrough. It goes in a lot more deeper and is a lot more interesting than most of the other Fallout playthroughs I've done. The only one that comes close, I think, is Fallout 3. And that's a stretch. Well, realistically, all of them have pretty good playthroughs, but this one, by far, to me, is the most interesting. Because it plays on something we ourselves have had trouble with. When does technology become sentient to the point where we consider it people? Like the two Alexis devices that they put in a room that basically start communicating with each other. It was very creepy, but does that mean that they're becoming sentient? I kind of dived off of the slavery aspect there, didn't I? When are we going to stop when are we going to do the liberation of the smart toaster? And I feel like, I sped off of our comparison track a little bit, maybe a lot, when I just started ranting on about sentience and the liberation of the smart toaster. And realistically, I wanted this to be a better video than I normally do, but this is a good thing that we got this out of the air, because this has been something that's been bothering me since I did my very first playthrough of Fallout 4. And I start comparing the two groups. Realistically, there's more comparison than difference between the railroad of our timeline and the railroad of the Fallout 4 timeline, because they're people trying to help people. Granted, they might not have the Commonwealth's interest at heart, but they have a group of people's interest in heart. They have the synths. They're risking their lives to help synths. Just like the people in our timeline who operated in the Underground Railroad to help free African slaves. They risked their lives. They were actually breaking the law. There was a law that stated you could be arrested and fined for stealing slaves or helping them escape their masters. I hate saying that. Harriet Tubman had a price on her head. She was wanted by the U.S. government and by several different cities down in the South. Frederick Douglass had to flee to London. Well, no, not London, Liverpool, to escape being put back into slavery because he technically never earned his freedom. He ran away, and his friends had to buy his freedom while he was living in exile in another country just so he didn't have to go back to slavery. Sims, they get everything redone. Their memories are wiped and replaced with different ones. They're given a new name. They're given sometimes even a new face. Trust me, you gotta play the game to understand what I'm talking about. And they're moved all around. I mean, you even see it in Fallout 3 at Rivet City. If you play the mini side quest there with the android, stuff like that, who needs a new memory and stuff. And wow, this is actually the longest video. I'm going to try and keep our videos under 38 minutes. Because I think too long of me just yelling at you is going to be upsetting, and too little is I'm going to end up trying to rush myself and make mistakes like you see me do every single time I make a video. Again, this season 1, is going to be my practice season. And I'm going to start my outro right now, if you permit me. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to see more content like this or have any suggestions for me, I'm sure you're going to have suggestions from this last video because I've just been messing it up. I've been looking off to the side. I've been looking everywhere but the screen, and I'm sorry about that. I'm actually pretty tired. I just helped my sister move. And I want to give a huge shout out to my sister. Your new place looks awesome, and hope your kids are born happy and healthy. May your first child be a masculine child. Not in the sense that it could be a boy, but in the sense that it is healthy. And if you guys know of any free video editing equipment that I can do for the next season, please let me know in the comment section. I'll be sure to get to that. And again, let me know if I need to change stuff up. And here's a little PSA for you. Every time you ring that bell notification, not only do you get up-to-date information about my channel, but you also set a synth free. Remember the sad song in the background. Every time you click that bell notification, a synth is set free by the railroad, given a new face, a new name, and new memories, and is probably evacuated to an even worse place than he actually is in when he lives in the Commonwealth. Thank you for watching this video. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so, and if you haven't done so, why haven't you? And yeah. Sorry I ranted a little bit. Sorry I raised my voice. I don't like doing that because it makes the stupid speaker thing crackle. And it makes it hard for you to listen to me. I'm gonna, watch this. I'm gonna upload it as soon as it's done. Bye. Like, share, and subscribe. Adios.